At this point in the semester, you're working on your persuasive essays. Much like the narrative essay that you worked on in the first half of the semester, the persuasive essay is asking certain things of you. The first of them is to pick a topic that you want to write about. The second is that you need to develop a thesis statement for this topic. As you can see, I've outlined a few things here. In this essay, you're going to develop a research question. You didn't have to do that for your narrative essay, but you did choose to answer some kind of life lesson question in that previous essay. Here, you're actually asking a research question of yourself, and then, as you seek to answer it, you're doing some research to provide credible evidence. As you can see, I've outlined some of the pages in the online learning text that you can refer to. For evidence, types of support, you can refer to chapters or pages 4.20 to 4.22. I really wish we had better pages to refer you to, but I think you understand what I mean when I say this. To look at the idea of the research question, you can look at working thesis development on page 4.08 to discuss topic development a little bit more, or to understand a little bit more about topic development. Please refer back to 4.07 in your text. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me, and I will help you think about these things on your own in a way that works for you. Now that we've reviewed the basics of the persuasive essay, let's take a little look at one of the more tricky elements of writing a persuasive essay or a research paper, that of your citations. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the semester, I posted an announcement about very, very brief citations in the text. When you're writing a research paper, you need to be a little bit more in-depth. There are two ways to do this. One is the in-text citation. The other is the reference page, which lists more complete information about your source. So let's start by looking at signal phrases. These are the in-text citation part of documenting your sources. You can see here that I've written some of the components of an in-text citation. So the first thing that you're going to want to do with your in-text citation is provide a signal phrase. Since your in-text citation is really serving as a kind of roadmap or a signal to show your reader that you are integrating outside sources and outside research with your own paper, what you need to do in your signal phrase is name your source. Generally, you're going to be using the author's last name to do that. Sometimes there won't be a name on the source that you're using. In that case, you may use the article's title or the organization who wrote the piece. It kind of depends on the sort of resource you're using. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So with your signal phrase, these are just a few of the examples that you can use with signal phrases. In the words of, according to, so-and-so wrote, so-and-so explained. Basically what you're doing with this signal phrase is you're picking a verb that helps explain or describe what your source was doing. For instance, if you had a source that was agreeing with what your previous source said in your essay, you might say that Bob Vila agreed with Moreau, something like that. I'm totally going on the fly here, but what you're doing is you're saying that somebody is agreeing with somebody else. If you have somebody who disagrees, then you could say so-and-so disagreed, pointing to research that explains X, Y, and Z. The next thing that you're going to want to do when you're writing out your signal phrase is incorporate the actual name of your source. Here, you can see I've used my last name, Prokop. The next part of the signal phrase is including the date of publication, the year of publication, whenever your source was released to the internet, whenever it was published in a book, whenever it was published in a journal, whenever that came out, that's the year that you need to use. The final part then is your verb. So in APA, you need to either use the past tense of the verb or the present perfect tense. Past tense has the ed. The present perfect has the has. So once you've done this, then you've basically got a signal phrase. You're just ready to incorporate the quote or the information that you've taken from the source. Now that you understand the basics of a signal phrase, let's look at using a signal phrase with a quote specifically. We've got my name, Prokop. We've got the year, 2013. We've got the verb, said. Here is my quote. I like cake, and I do. If you've got the page number from which you took this direct quote, now remember this is a direct quote, so since you're copying it word for word, you need to have the quotation marks around the language that you're taking from the source. If you've got the page numbers of that source, and you should either have a page number or a paragraph number of some sort, that will go at the end of your quote, outside the quotation marks, in parentheses. Then, at the very end, comes your punctuation, the period. I know this varies a little bit from what I've been writing on some of your essays, where I'm saying punctuation goes inside quotation marks. This is one case where it does go outside the quotation mark, just because you are quoting something directly from another source and integrating it into your paper with quotation marks and a signal phrase. This is how you do a signal phrase and a quotation, everything, a citation in your text for a quote. In the previous example, where I was saying I liked cake, I had the quote as it appeared in the original text. In another way of using signal phrases or citations, you can work with something called a dropped quotation. Here, you don't necessarily have the entire context of me saying that I like cake, so you might have written in some of your own ideas about cake and whether or not it's good or bad or healthy or whatever. As you can see here at the end, I have my signal phrase, and it looks, not my signal phrase, but my citation, and it looks a little bit different than it looked in the previous examples. Here, you can see I have a parentheses and a parentheses. Then, I have my punctuation here. My period is still on the outside. I have a comma here and a comma here, separating my name from the year and the page number. If you want to do something like this, where you are introducing your source and the quote all on its own, and then adding the citation at the very end like this, you can. These are two different ways of doing an in-text citation, and by varying the ways in which you use your in-text citations, you're going to provide a little bit more variety for your readers. Okay, so now we've talked about how to use a signal phrase if you've got an in-text citation and a direct quote. If you recall from your text, there is something else that you can do to incorporate other ideas into your text. You can use paraphrases and you can use summaries to put the main point or to put interesting points from somebody else's work into your own words and into your paper. What I've got here now is an example of a paraphrase. You'll see I've still got the source's name, I've still got the year, and I've still got a verb. However, this part in orange is what I've taken and put into my own words. Pretend I'm not the one who said them in the first place. At the very end then, you'll see that I have my parentheses, and I have the P, the period, the page and the number of the page, and then the period outside of the parentheses, outside of that little phrase. What I've done here is I've taken a direct quote and I've put it into my own words. So I'm still giving the information, all of the information for how my readers can find the original source material and where to look for that specifically, but I'm putting this into my own words. Now, if there is no chance of your reader getting confused about the context of your paraphrase, or that your paraphrase is indeed a paraphrase and not your own wording, you don't necessarily have to use a signal phrase, but for now, I would advise you to use signal phrases and practice getting familiar with them, especially in the rough drafts of your papers. The other thing that you can do if you don't want to use the signal phrase is, if you remember from earlier in the video, you can include your source information at the end in the parentheses. Remember, name, comma, year, comma, page number, period on the outside. That's also another option for making sure that the information is cited so that so that your reader can go back and find out who exactly said what and where. So far, we've looked at what to do if you've only got a single author in your source. Let's look at what we do if we have two authors. You've got author 1, you've got author 2, you still give the year, still have a comma here, do your quote, don't forget your quotation marks, and then the page number with the parentheses at the end. If you are not using a signal phrase, if you're just introducing your source by starting with their information, or if you've paraphrased, when you do the citation at the very end of your information, instead of using the word "and," you need to do the actual ampersand. I'm not an artist, so I'm not very good at making those ampersands, but it is that funny little S character thingy on your keyboard. Like I said, this is just if you are putting all of your citation information together at the end or at the beginning within your parentheses all together. There will be times that you're working with a source or a resource that has more than two sources. For those, you can refer to the Shapiro Library's website for more help, or you can refer to the Purdue OWL, and it can explain all the different varieties and ways of sourcing in-text citations. The last thing that I wanted to talk about before we move into doing a citation for references page is an as cited in citation. So let's pretend that I wrote a book. My name is the name that will go on that book, ProGup. But let's say that I interviewed somebody. Let's just use the name Smith from the previous reference. Let's say I interviewed somebody named Smith, and they provided me with some really good information in my book. You come along and you read my book. So you think that, oh, my teacher, Marcella, she is my primary source, so I'm just going to cite her in the document. While that's almost right, if you are referring to something that somebody else said within my book, then you need to do an as cited in sort of reference. So what this would look like is the phrase as cited in, and my name still. Because if you read something in my book, then you are going to give me credit for that. You're still going to use the year and you're still going to use the page number. However, this is telling your readers that the information did not come directly from the person who said it. You found it in another source, a secondary source. If you want more information about primary and secondary sources, please refer to your Module 4 guide on that, or else visit the library, visit the Purdue. You can even Google the difference between primary and secondary sources.